Please pray with me. God, I ask that the meditations of my mind and the words of my lips would be holy and acceptable to you this day, and be for us a word. Amen. As I said at the top of our service, I decided this week we needed to have an intervention. And some of that was born out of my own exhaustion. Some weeks are pretty easy and some weeks are pretty hard. And this week I got to Wednesday morning and realized I needed to take a vacation day and sleep. And when I did that, I was surprised at how many people told me they were really proud of me for taking a vacation day to sleep. And I realized some of us might need permission to take a vacation day and sleep. Because it was only Wednesday, but some weeks are like that. As many of you know, I lived here for a handful of years, and I grew up in a town kind of like this, and then God sent me to the subarctic. Do you guys remember that? Some of you who knew me, God told me I had to go to, Nineveh or Anchorage or whatever it was. And one of the things you learn when you go to a foreign land, which I will tell you, it is a foreign land, okay? The high this week was like -10. One of the things, if you studied abroad or you've traveled a lot, that you start to experience when you go to a foreign land is that you start to notice not only things that are different about the foreign land you're in, but it helps you reflect on the place where you've come from. And one of the things I realized while I was living up there is that people were less tired. Now, it doesn't mean their life was easy. It doesn't mean their mental health was great. It's not. But people were less tired. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I realized I think it has something to do with what we feel like we have to get done in a day. If you live in a place where the only thing to do is watch the snow fall and then go scrape it out of your driveway, you can start to feel like you don't have to get anything done today. And if you live in a place where you're not going to church for a 6 p.m. meeting because you're not driving down a hill one more time in the ice, you can get to a place where you don't worry about those things. So I wanted to talk about rest because as I've come back here, I've re-noticed how stressed and tired and overwhelmed some of us living here feel. I have a question for you all. I want you to raise your hand if you are a farmer. Gail is making a timeout. You're a half farmer. I was like, timeout or a half farmer? Okay, you can be a half farmer. Now I want you to keep your hands up. Raise your hand if you're the child of a farmer. Keep your hands up. Now raise your hand if you are the grandchild of a farmer. Okay. Almost all of us are about 1 to 3 generations away from farmers. I had a farmer for a dad. My dad was born in 1933. He lived on a cow and whatever farm you live on in Washington State in the 1930s. And my dad, because he was a farmer, had very particular ideas about how life should work, okay? You had to get up every day and work because there were cows to be milked. Any of you ever heard that? Those of you who grew up in dairy country, I know have, right? There are animals to be watered and cows to be milked, and there is work to be done every single day. And that, I think, pervades, especially those of us who grew up in a Protestant culture. Every single day there is work to be done. And if you're not doing anything, what are you doing? Okay, I want you to think about your parents or your grandparents or your great-grandparents or think about those farmers as we read some of the texts that appear in our Bible. Exodus 23:10 10 says, 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow so that the poor of your people may eat. And what they leave, the wild animals may eat. You shall do the same with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days shall you do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, so that your ox and your donkey may have relief, and your homeborn slave and the resident alien may be refreshed. Can you imagine I can't imagine telling my father that he should work for 6 years and then take a year off. My dad mowed his lawn 3 times a week until he was 85 years old. He would literally get off the phone if he didn't want to talk to us and say, I got to go cut the grass. Can you imagine the paradigm shift this would require if we lived by this command? Farm for 6 years and then let it sit. Exodus 34 reminds us again, 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Even in plowing time and in harvest time, you shall rest. I wish Virginia Autry were here. I can't imagine telling her if there was a storm coming in and it was the 7th day, she better sit right where she was because that wheat'll have to wait. Exodus 35 says, Moses assembled all the congregation of the Israelites and said to them, this is after he gets the tablets the second time. You know, he's had a hard time having to write this stuff down twice. He gets it the second time, comes down the mountain, assembles the assembly and says, 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day you shall have a holy Sabbath of solemn rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. It's crazy. It was a lot of work to write in the ancient world, right? These Torah scrolls, the scrolls that would have had the laws of Moses that were passed down from generation to generation. It took a lot of work to write those. We should pay attention when something is repeated over and over again in the text, because it's not an accident. If it takes a long time to write and somebody writes it more than once, it's probably a sign we should pay attention. Later in the Leviticus codes, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am giving you, the land shall observe a Sabbath for the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your unpruned vine. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. Later in the same book, God tells the Israelites what will happen if they observe it. If you follow my statutes and keep my commandments and observe them faithfully, I will give you your rains in their season. And the land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing floor shall overlap the vintage, and the vintage shall overlap the sowing, and you shall eat your bread to the full and live securely in your land. And I will grant peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall make you afraid. I will remove dangerous animals from the land, and no sword shall go through your land. You shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. It goes on and on and on. What will happen if we actually listen? I will be your God, and you will be my people. I am the Lord your God, who broke you out of the land of Egypt. Over and over, we're commanded to rest, to sit down, to be still, to take a day off. And yet, for those of us who were raised by farmers, it's really, really hard. The word Shabbat, which is the word that the day Shabbat comes from for Jews, Sabbath, right? Shabbath. Sometimes it has a th at the end. That word literally means to sit down or to sit still. Now, Protestants especially are bad at this because we like to say, oh, well, Jesus said it was fine to heal on the Sabbath, so I'm just going to keep on going. But Jesus healing on the Sabbath didn't mean we didn't have to rest on the Sabbath. He's just saying it's okay to save your brother and not let him bleed out, right? But it doesn't take away the commandment to sit down and to rest. Sit down and rest. For many of us, staying busy is the way that we feel important. I won't make you raise your hand, but I know for me, staying busy can be a way to feel important, right? If I can just have a purpose outside of myself and stay busy, I'll be okay. I was raised with that, right? There were days in my childhood, and my parents were good parents, but they were Presbyterians, so they had some problems, where the more you did, the better a person you were. And I literally, in middle school and high school, would wake up, go to swim practice at 6 a.m., then go to school, then go back to swim practice at 2:30, then leave from swim practice a little bit early, drive to Olympia, Washington, go to symphony practice for 3 hours, and get home at 10 o'clock at night. No problem, right? It's normal. Yeah, David's shrugging. He's like, yeah, this is how you raise children. Come on. And I agree, except that sometimes it's okay to say, I took on too much and I can't do it. So some of us, we stay busy because it makes us feel like we're contributing, because it's normal in our families of origin, because we're convinced that if we don't mow the grass or bale the hay or whatever, you guys don't bale hay here really, right? Do you? It just looks so different. It's also stickier, right? We have it in our minds that if we don't do this, then what will happen? The world will end. Something. We'll miss out on the fortunes of our field. But the text tells us that if we trust in the rest, the sitting down, the letting it go for a day, that God will make it okay. Some of us stay really, really busy outside of our 6 days because it helps us not look at the problems we have at home. I can do that. I am an expert workaholic when I need to avoid my marriage problems. Some of us stay really, really, really busy because it helps us not have to look at the parts of ourselves that we don't love. I'm also very good at that. If I just look at everybody else's problems, then I don't have to see the ones in myself. And some of us, our workaholics, are very good at being busy outside of ourselves because we're still trying to earn someone's approval or love. If you are a person that feels like you have to do all the things you're asked to do, or you have to stay busy, as your pastor, I want to give you permission to stop. You don't actually have to do all that stuff you were asked to do. You don't have to stay busy just because it's how you were raised. It's okay. The farm is not going to fail because you took a day off. One of the things that I hear a lot when I ask people who seem really stressed because they're really busy is, what will happen if you just stop? What will happen if you stop? You know what I hear a lot? I hear, if I don't, no one will. Have any of you ever said that? If I don't do this, no one will. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes when we put buckets down that are getting too heavy to carry, nobody picks up the bucket. Sometimes when we put buckets down that are too heavy to carry, somebody else comes along and has a chance to pick up the bucket. And sometimes when we put down a bucket we've been carrying for too long, we realize, man, we didn't really need that bucket anyway. If you are carrying too many buckets, if your buckets that you are trying to carry are too heavy, if your plate is too full and you can't eat it all, it's okay to put down the bucket. It is okay to say, I can't do this anymore. I thought I could. I said I would. And now I'm not going to. Some of us, myself very much included, feel like we will disappoint people if we don't carry the buckets we're asked to carry. How many of you feel like you will disappoint someone if you say no when you're asked to do something? Gail, you can put your hand high. Luckily, I got the talk from Gail. Right. I was raised to say, yes, I will do that. Yes, I will do that. Luckily, Gail had an intervention with me about 5 years ago and literally wrote cards for me to learn to say no. I don't know if you remember that. I kept them in my car for a while. It said something like, thank you so much for thinking of me, maybe next year. There were a whole set of cards. So many of us are raised to think that if we're asked to do something, we have to say yes, because what will happen if we don't? We'll disappoint someone, right? They'll see us as a disappointment or a failure, or we'll be less valuable. So I don't know about you guys, but my tendency is to say yes to all sorts of things, and then I end up disappointing people because I can't do any of them well. Because I've said yes to so many buckets that I can't carry them. It's okay to say no. No is a complete sentence. We're going to practice it together. Ready? Hey, would you like to take on this thing? I'm going to ask you and you're going to say no, okay? Hey, Donna, would you like to take on a new thing? Not right now, thank you. Hers is much better. Okay, now all of you, would you like to do these 10 things that somebody thinks you should do? Look at how easy that was. No. You can just say no. Now we're going to practice a different thing. Sometimes we find that we've said yes to things that either we could say yes to in the moment and it was fine. And sometimes our life changes, right? And now we need to back out of it. But for many of us, that's hard because there's shame involved. Myself, like I'm right up there, right? I was raised, if you committed to something, you finished it. Do you know how many years of piano I had to take that I hated because my mother claimed I'd committed at 5 years old to take piano lessons? 14 or 12, I guess 13. I got to quit when I graduated from high school because in my parents' mind, I'd said yes to piano, so I had to finish it. So many of us are like that. Sometimes there are things we said yes to that we can't do anymore. You know what we can do then? We can say, I'm really sorry I can't do this anymore. You can put the bucket down. No, it's crazy concept for Protestants, but it's okay to say, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to put the bucket down. So if there's something in your life that it feels like is no longer bringing you joy, it's okay to say, I can't do this anymore. And if that thing is something at church and you think you're going to disappoint me or disappoint someone else, give that up to God. We'll be fine. I was talking with a young man this week who was stressed to the point he is sick. We were talking about what was stressing him out, and one of the things that was stressing him out was trying to manage how his family felt about each other. And one of the things that was stressing him out was how he was going to manage school and work. And so many of us take on these stresses around us, whether it's in our family or at work or with our kids or at school or with the PTA or PEO or JWL or Chautauqua or all the millions of things you guys have to do because you don't have enough snow to shovel, that we get sick. because we're not giving ourselves enough time to rest. It is okay to say no, and it is okay to say, I can't do this anymore. In 2019 and 2021, the National Toxicology Program and the International Agency for Research on Cancer both released studies where they looked at what happens to cancer rates amongst people who are night shift workers. So night shift workers are people who work, at night, and we know that it disrupts their hormonal balances, their melatonin, their stress hormones. Not sleeping enough or not sleeping at normal times or trying to fight your circadian rhythm screws up your body. I'm sure if you have questions about this, Dr. Baylor is a better person to talk to than me. But people who do night shift work, people who don't sleep well, people who have so much stress in their life that they don't get enough rest, have higher rates of metabolic disease. So they have higher rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease. They have higher rates of mental health challenges like depression and anxiety. And they even have higher rates of cancer. And when you take out all the other things, age, lifestyle, all the other factors, the cancer rate is high, like significantly higher, statistically significant. And one of these studies said in 2021 that poor sleep is, and I quote, probably carcinogenic to humans. It's probably carcinogenic. I mean, so is smoking. Rest is important. Rest is important for our bodies and for our minds and for our souls. And it's important because it's a place where we invite God and ourselves to be really present together. Shabbat should be a ceasefire. Shabbat should be a time when we stop and get refilled and rest and are present. But for so many of us, it's just become another day. Church should be a place where we are restored, but for so many of us, it's just another place of work. Family stuff should bring us joy and community. But for many of us, it's just another place of tension and stress. So as your pastor, I want to remind you that Jesus, who really actually did have a lot of work to do that only he could do, even Jesus took a nap. He took a lot of them, actually. But he got really tired after doing a bunch of work, and he laid down in a boat, and he took a nap. And then when there was a crazy storm that, of course, only Jesus could have stopped because the rest of them can't stop it, and he was woken up by his friends, he said, "Why'd you wake me up? Don't you have any faith?" If you think the world is going to end or nobody will take care of the things that you're carrying or some catastrophe will fall if you put down the stuff you're carrying, I want you to remember Jesus taking that nap. Don't you have any faith? God's going to work it out. So this week I want to invite you to take some rest, to look at your calendars and see what is maybe too much, and make sure that the things that you're doing are actually filling you up, not depleting you. Amen.